Hey guys, welcome back into my studio and welcome to part 2 of this how to draw a tiger series. So in the first part of this video we looked at how to sort of render the eyes, all this fur surrounding the eyes and down onto this guy's cheeks, and in part 2, which is this video, we're going to look at the more complex fur, so the fur that's coming up onto this guy's nose, all the way down onto the muzzle, onto the nose itself, and also how to tackle these quite confusing looking sideburns. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So as we enter this second video, we're roughly about halfway through this entire drawing now. So we've pretty much completed most of the eyes, you know, all that fur around the top of the head, down onto the cheeks, surrounding all the eyes. And that, apart from the eyes, the fur that was surrounding it, that was relatively straightforward. There wasn't too much change in direction, there wasn't too much complicated fur texture in that area. However, as we move into the second part of this drawing now, this is where we start to tackle the fur that's a little bit more complicated, that's going to take a little bit more concentration. First one being where we're working on now, which is the bridge of the nose. Now, this is an area that I see a couple of times people either don't do the right length of stroke, or they don't pay enough attention to the changes in direction. And to be honest, you know, I've been there. Sometimes I don't pay enough attention and I get it wrong. Sometimes I do strokes that are too long, and it is easily done. But that's where this is the area where you really do have to pay the most attention. So as you can see, I'm following the same sort of basic fur layering techniques that I've been using throughout the entire piece. So I'm using my tattoo needle just to lay down this under fur that we've got. So whilst I'm doing this, what I'm using is my tattoo needles. Reason for this is because you can put down a layer of quite faint looking fur, just so that you can plan out which way that fur is going. So if you pay close attention to what I'm doing, you can actually see how the fur is bending and contorting itself around the different aspects of this tiger. I've put in this, like I say, this quite faint base layer, and now I'm going back over the top with it with a little bit harder pressure. I haven't really changed my tattoo needle at all, but I'm just, as you can see, that fur is getting a little bit brighter. The more layers that I'm putting down, the thicker that fur is going to look. So I'm taking away quite a lot of that black board colour that's probably going to show through, which is absolutely fine because this area doesn't have an awful lot of black showing through. It is a little bit thicker fur. But this is where your line art really sort of comes into its own. If you put enough detail in when you're transferring that line art initially, you can add little bits of fur texture, just sort of giving you a little bit of an indication as to which way you're going with the fur, which way the fur's laying, and then that way it gives you a little bit of leeway. If you forget to, let's say, look up at your reference photo, you can sort of follow the lines that you've already put on your board. Now, after I've added that initial base layer down, I'm going in with a slightly different tool. So this is one of my slice tools with the X-Acto style blade on it. Now this will give quite a brighter texture, so even sort of light pressure with this one will give a brighter mark than what it would using the tattoo needles. So this is what I use in probably sort of like the third layer of fur that I'm putting down. So I've initially put down that base layer, I've then put down a sort of stronger base layer where I've pressed a little bit harder, and now I'm going in with this slice tool just to brighten up a couple of areas and lay in where that brightest fur is going to be. Now when it comes to laying that brightest fur down, I'm going to use a different tool again, but we'll come to that when I start using it. So as you can see, the tattoo needles play quite an important role in this piece. I've come across a slightly different tattoo needle style that I've actually used quite a lot during this one. I think I mentioned it in the last video, and it's the Magnum weaved tattoo needles. And what I found was, instead of splicing my tattoo needles like I used to do with the round liners just to give it a little bit more texture, this one already has the tattoo needles slightly overlaid with each other and slightly spread apart, and it gives a slightly more natural fur texture than what the round liners do. So I use that pretty much throughout the rest of this piece, sort of on the bridge of the nose, up where I was just working a minute ago, just on the sort of forehead in between the eyes, and it's really good at creating that fur texture. So what I need to do here, where I'm working on the bridge of this nose, is just merge the two areas together now. So I need to make sure that I'm sort of going back and forth between the two areas, because I don't want a very harsh line down the centre of this guy's face. So you just need to make sure that you're going back and forth, and make sure that the brightness level on both sides is going to be the same. And again, I'm constantly rotating my board just to get a slightly better angle when I'm working at, because what I like to do is pull my strokes towards me. I don't really, to be honest, I don't think I ever push away from me on the board. I'm always sort of dragging that needle, dragging that slice tool towards me, and that's what I find gives the greatest level of texture for me. It's an easier move for me to do than to push it away. But in order to do that, especially with a piece of this size, I do have to rotate my board quite a lot. But don't be afraid of doing that. You know, it's best to get the board into a position that's going to be easier for you to work with, rather than trying to contort yourself around to try and make yourself fit around the board. Again, brightening up parts of this fur texture with that slice tool. I'm paying really close attention to my reference photo. I've already planned out parts of this drawing, from the beginning, just by examining my reference photo. And to be honest, I feel that's something that I always do before I start a piece. And it works quite well. I don't know if any of you have already watched the video where I sort of break down this reference photo that we're using for this one. If not, I'll put a card up to it in the top right hand corner for you now. And what that's going to do is show you how I break down this reference photo specifically. However, you can basically apply all the principles to any reference photo. But I've already planned out, if you have a look on the bridge of the nose where that bright area is in the middle, and how it's got two darker patches on either side that just make it look like the nose is receding backwards. I plan out where all the different complicated areas are going to be, which we'll come to in just a minute as we start to work on the sideburn areas of this tiger. I'll look at the different fur directions, especially on the bridge of this nose where, it's sort of coming to a point in the middle, it's curving down, it's curving up onto the forehead, and we go through all that in that video there. So if you want to have a look at that, just click on that. I'll also put a link to it in the description for you guys. And there's nothing complicated about what I'm doing at the minute. The fur sort of layering process that I use is the same throughout the entire piece, and to be honest, throughout pretty much all of my pieces. We put that initial base layer down, add a few thicker base layers on top of it, and then go in with those top highlights. Now I just want to talk to you a little bit how I'm going to tackle this nose. Now for an area such as this, I like to use stippling. And a lot of the times I actually stipple with a tattoo needle. So this tattoo needle is, I think off the top of my head, it was a, I think it was a 7 round liner, or it may have even been the Magnum that I was using. It looks a little bit thick to be one of the round liners, so I think it might have been the Magnum. And basically all I'm doing is stippling, so small dots, again exactly the same way that I tackle fur. So I'm planning out where those highlights are going to be, where those darkest areas are going to be. I've already studied my reference photo to know this. I've already helped plan it out on my line art, so I've added that sort of faint base layer of stippling over the entirety of the nose. And now I'm going in with my X-Acto knife, my steel blade X-Acto knife, adding those highlights just on the underneath of that top left side, and then keeping those dark areas at the bottom. And I find stippling with the tattoo needle works really well, because instead of using a single point, you're using, you know, however many points the tattoo needle has. So it could be a 9 round liner, it could be a 5, and it's either going to have 9 or 5, you know, points to it, instead of just the single point that you're going to get with the X-Acto knife. So by doing that, you're covering a larger area, and it gives a bit of a smoother texture if that's the sort of look you're going for. And then going in with that X-Acto blade just to add that brightness level in. And I was especially careful just to leave those sort of black circles on the nose without anything in them. On the reference photo he does have a couple of little blemishes there, and I thought it was nice just to keep that in to stop the nose looking almost so boring, because it's not really much of a focal point. There's not an awful lot going on with that nose. I'm constantly comparing different parts of my drawing to other parts. So when I look at my reference photo, I'll see, for example, let's say the brightness that's underneath the eyes. So that's quite a bright level of white, especially sort of a little bit more in person when you actually see the drawing, compared to sort of on the screen where it dulls down the brightness a little bit. And the bright white fur that was sort of overlapping at the bottom of the nose onto the actual nose itself, that is the same level of brightness on the reference photo. So I needed to make sure that I was comparing my work constantly. So I was making sure that the brightness that I had underneath the eyes matched up with the brightness that I have on the top of sort of the bottom of the nose, just as it meets the nose. And I do that with all different areas of my drawing. So for example, where I'm working now, so we're working on a bit more of the muzzle. Now what I'll do is I'll compare this again to other parts of my drawing, to compare and find out where else in the drawing is the same level of brightness. And again, it was quite similar to just underneath the eye and just above the eye, so I knew that I needed to go quite bright with this area. So in that respect, I'm planning which tools I'm going to use to get that level of brightness. And for me, it's the slice tools with a different blade. So instead of using the X-Acto blade, as I did, I'm using a blade with a more curved end to it. So it's the blade that comes as standard with the slice tools anyway. And what it does, because it's a curved point and not a straight point, it takes away a thicker line, and therefore it's almost a brighter line as well. So that's the top tool that I used for creating the brightest highlights on the muzzle. And you'll see it come in at quite a few different points. So the standard X-Acto knife style blade, that's the only way I can sort of describe it, is in this tool that I've got here. So it's a scalpel looking tool. However, if you see a tool that's got almost like an orange shaft to it, and it's a little bit thicker like this one here, that's got the curved edge to it. So that's the one that I'm using to create those thicker, brighter highlighted marks. but I'm making sure not to go a bit overboard with it. I'm making sure if I just used that one from the offset and didn't create this build up of layers, it wouldn't look as dense, it wouldn't look as realistic. You still have to create those layers of fur, even though it's going to eventually be this bright level. I still use my tattoo needle to sort of work out where I'm going and plot things in. I then go over that with my X-Acto knife just to make it a bit brighter, and then my final layer is going to be that really bright highlight. But having all those underlayers in as well creates more depth and a lot more realism. Doing exactly the same on this side, on the right side of this guy's face, as what I did on the left side. So you can basically see the whole process again in case you missed it. So I've pretty much covered the entirety of this muzzle on this right side almost with the tattoo needles, and then as you can see I went in a little bit with the scalpel and my normal X-Acto blade, as you can see here. And then what I'll do is I'll really boost those highlights with that that curved end slice blade. Now if you want to know a little bit more about slice and the tools that I've been using in this video, I do have a slice tool review where I go through all the tools really that I'm using in this one and even some more, and you can sort of see really if slice is going to be something that you might want to try. I'll go through pretty much quite a few things that they sent me, a few different tools, a few different blades, show you the different marks that they make, and I found certainly there was a few surprises in that. Things that I didn't think were going to work particularly well actually worked really well, and they became sort of a tool that I've implemented into my arsenal for pretty much every piece now. Now these tools aren't going to suit everyone, you know, I'm not a portrait artist, so I don't know if they're going to be particularly good for portrait work, but they work really well for fur. So if you're an animal artist, you know, pop over there and have a watch of that video. If you're a portrait artist, you may find a tool that you didn't know about or that you think might work really well for your style of artwork. And I also have a 10% discount code that you guys can use if you do want to purchase anything. It's down in my description, and it's also in the description of sort of all those videos. It's on my social media and things like that as well. Now as we start to work down onto this guy's chin, the fur in itself changes a little bit, and I think I picked up on this when I was having a look at the reference photo to begin with. Now the fur just underneath this guy's mouth on sort of like the chin, at the very bottom of it, it's relatively normal fur. However, as you move up towards the mouth, it's almost got a wet look to it, so the fur's clumped together a lot more than what it has anywhere else in the drawing. So as you can see, when I'm putting these base layers down with my tattoo needle, I'm planning for that. I'm sort of clumping my strokes together already, leaving sort of more of the black showing through to give this impression that there is gaps in the fur and that it is clumped together. And this was probably one of the harder parts of the drawing, just to try and get that texture through, that there is a sort of wetness to this guy's chin. But I made sure and tried to not get myself too bogged down with it. I sort of planned in where things were going to be, sort of outlined where certain clumps were going to be. Now by all means I haven't got every single clump in there. I think, you know, that's an unrealistic expectation to get every strand of fur in the exact right place. But just by taking your time and planning out where those clumps are going to go, even if you haven't got all of them in there, just having a few of them and giving that impression that it's a little bit more clumped together than the rest of the drawing just helps, like I say, give your drawing a little bit more realism and a bit more interest to look at. Now as we move on to these sideburns, these were probably the most daunting part of this whole piece. I was dreading it pretty much from the start, from the outset, from when I chose the reference photo, and that's probably why I've ended up leaving it to the end. So it's a completely different fur texture to what we've been working on before. It's a lot longer, it's a little bit more wiry, a little bit more dense, a little bit more fluffy. There's quite a few different textures going on here. But the actual technique that we've used hasn't changed. You know, every time I do fur, it's the same technique. The only thing that may change is the tool. So for this one, what I'm doing is I'm using my single point, my 1 RL, which is my round liner tattoo needle. Now the reason I did this is it gives the lightest stroke, the faintest stroke. It allows me to map out the direction without making the lines too bright. And I want to get a very wiry sort of texture in this fur. And the single point round liner needle allowed me to do that. So all I'm doing is laying in this initial base layer, trying to find shapes in the fur. So as you can see, I've got that sort of that more pointed section just in the middle of where I'm working. I've got this sort of darkened area as well. I'm just sort of planning out different aspects and different areas. And all I'm doing then is laying in the deepest levels of fur that I can see, plotting out where I'm going to put other things. And once I've done that, you'll see I then go over either with a different tattoo needle or with my slice tool, boosting up those highlights a little bit, planning where the brightest of highlights is going to be. And then I come in, instead of with my slice tool with the curved edge, I come in with, you can probably see it's a tool with a red handle. And this is a tool that I've had pretty much since I started my Scratchboard work. It comes in a set with the ampersand sort of tools that you can buy. I don't specifically know what it's called, it's more the blade that's on the end. It's a nice curved blade, and I just found after testing a few different things out, it gave me the best texture that I wanted. It just gave me that extra bit of brightness that I was looking for without making the fur stroke too thick. And that's what I didn't want in this area. I didn't want the fur to look thick in itself. I just wanted it to look sort of wiry and densely packed. You probably might be able to see it now. I've explained it a little bit. You might be able to see it a bit more on the right hand side of this guy's face. So as you can see, I'm using that 1 round liner. I'm plotting in where things are going to go. And I'm working on it a little section at a time just to make sure that I'm getting the technique right. If I was doing anything wrong, then all I've done is work on a small section before moving on to another section, and then I can alter my plan if it's not working out for whatever reason. And I'm making sure to keep the lines really almost loose, and the best way I can describe it is wiggly. So just wiggling my hand, wiggling the tattoo needle as I'm coming down and putting the strokes in. It's a little bit harder to see because the video is sped up. So I might do a specific video on how to tackle this exact type of fur in the future, but you can sort of see it coming together at a nice fast pace when I've sped it up like this. And I can't tell you the importance of adding in those little flyaway hairs and the difference that that makes. I feel it just creates a whole nother depth to the piece and a whole nother level of realism just by having a few random hairs. You know, they may not even be in your reference photo. You may have just added them in just because you thought they looked good. And to be honest, I think it makes a drawing look a lot better when you do have these random hairs that necessarily go against the grain, or it makes it look like the tiger's actually been out in the wild and it's not brushed, it's not, you know, a pristine looking tiger. There is fur that goes a random direction or a little bit off the pace, a little bit, you know, not quite following the grain of the other fur strokes that you're putting down. So we're starting to come to the end of this video now. Obviously I've split it into 2 different parts just because it was so long to have all the videos put into one. So I think I've separated it into just, you know, the eyes and the top part of the head, and this second video is a lot more about the complexities of the different fur that you've got. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you've enjoyed sort of following through the process of this one. It was a big piece. It was, you know, the biggest one I've ever worked on. I think it was 14 by 18 inches. So that created a lot of new challenges for me, a lot of stepping away from the board, making sure that I've got things in the right place. Even the video in itself proved a little bit more of a challenge. Sort of trying to fit it all on camera, making sure I wasn't blocking out too much. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope, you know, you may have picked up a few tips, may have found a couple of things helpful. At the minute I'm just finishing off, going back in all these little black striped areas. I'm just adding a few little extra details in there to make it look more realistic. Maybe in things that aren't on the reference photo, boosting up the highlights and things like that, just making it just a little bit more realistic, if that makes sense. But like I say guys, I hope you've enjoyed it. There's a few little extra parts that I've left in just for you guys to watch at the end. So putting in those final little details underneath and putting in those fine whisker strokes at the very end. In regards to the whiskers, I'm not going to talk too much about them. I do have a video more specific on whiskers that you can watch. I'll link that up in the top right hand corner for you now. But I'll leave you guys just to watch them get put in. And I'll see you again in the next video.